I'm Jeb Butler of the Butler Law Firm. Recently, a woman from Valdosta, Georgia was killed in Irwin County near Fitzgerald, Georgia, when a tractor trailer ran through a stop sign. This gives us a chance to talk about truck cases generally and what the Butler Law Firm would look at, think about, and do in a case like this. What I've got on the screen behind me is the news report from the Tifton Gazette. And as you can tell from the length of the article, it gives sort of minimal information. It tells us who lost their life and where the collision occurred. From here, we know a few things. We know that because the decedent lived in Valdosta, the estate is going to be opened in Lowndes County, Georgia, and the wrongful death case and the estate claim can then be brought either in Irwin County or wherever the truck company is based. But one of the first things we do is pull up the intersection where this occurred on Google Maps and see what we can tell. So I've done that here, and we can already tell a little bit. The intersection of Old Whitley Road and Votech Road is a rural intersection, and street view coverage is spotty. You can see the blue lines behind me. So we have street view coverage to the east and south, but not to the west, and sort of spotty to the north. That's all right. We can still zoom in and get a good look at what must have happened here. So if we do that, we can drop in on street view, and let's get our bearings here. Okay, so we're now looking to the west. So we're looking the direction that the tractor trailer was coming from. It had been coming like this into the collision. And right away we can tell that there's no obstruction here. This is a rural area. There's nothing that should have been in the way of the tractor trailer coming this way, and there's just a stop sign. So I don't see any rumble strips, those kind of things that you would roll over. I don't see flashing lights. There's a sign sort of way down here. I don't know if you can see it. I've circled it there. That says something. That may be a caution sign, but there's not much in the way of caution signs approaching the intersection. So the first thing you want to know is, how is the tractor trailer driver missing this? Tractor trailer drivers are commercial drivers. They have to take a commercial driver's exam. They have to have a commercial driver's license. Usually they should know what they're doing. How did he mess this up? Well, there's a few things that we think about first. First, as many of us know, a lot of truck drivers are on the road for a long time because that is how they make their money. But there are limitations on this. We don't want a bunch of really tired truck drivers driving around, so the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations impose some limitations. They're called hours of service rules, and a truck driver is only supposed to drive so many hours in a given time period, whether that's a day or a week or a longer period. If the truck driver is breaking those rules, that may explain what's going on. We may have a tired or fatigued driver because he's been overdriving, and that is one basis for liability. The truck company, the driver, can be in trouble for that. Another thing we look at is alcohol or drugs. Now, you really want to think about that in just about any car wreck case. But particularly here, we look for the alcohol and drugs like we normally would, the recreational stuff, but also sometimes you find truck drivers who are on amphetamines or other drugs that they want to use to keep them awake and alert so they can drive more and earn more money. So we want to be thinking about that, and we should be able to get that information. After a trucking collision, the truck company is required to have the driver tested, so we should be able to find out what was in the driver's system. We need to make sure that the truck company gives us that in the lawsuit in what's called the discovery period. If you don't watch them, sometimes they'll try to withhold that. We also want to think about the medical condition of the driver. If you're missing a stop sign in circumstances like this, is it because you're tired or even asleep at the wheel? Our firm's handling a tractor trailer case right now where a truck driver just fell asleep on the interstate and plowed into the back of our client's vehicle. Is that what happened? Or is this a driver who had slept poorly and therefore was fatigued and therefore wasn't paying as close of attention as they should have? In order to think about that, we can look at some of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations rules about the fitness of drivers. If drivers have certain medical conditions like sleep apnea, they're not supposed to be driving trucks until they get that resolved because it makes them tired or less safe drivers who may drive when they're not fully alert or drive and fall asleep while they're doing it. We also want to think about distraction. In a normal car wreck case, you would think about cell phones and texting. We certainly want to explore that here. Try to get a copy of the driver's cell phone and his phone records from the time of the collision. And then we also want to think about things like the CB radio, truckers, or the Qualcomm with which the trucker might have communicated with the truck company. There are additional options for distraction when it comes to truck drivers. Another interesting thing we want to think about is the condition of the vehicle. So it's possible, this is an old picture, this comes from May of 2013, so it's possible that this driver slammed on brakes but couldn't stop in time. We wouldn't necessarily see the skid marks here if that had occurred, because this is a very recent collision. So we want to think about the maintenance of the truck. Now, when a tractor trailer driver goes anywhere, he's supposed to fill out a pre-trip inspection form and a post-trip inspection form. Both those forms should talk about the condition of the truck, including the brakes. So we want to think about whether the truck company was maintaining the brakes like they should have been. We also want to think about the trailer. Now, these trailers in commercial truck cases often don't get cared for very well. They get beat up real bad. Because what will happen is no one really consistently uses the trailer. The trailer is hauled from one depot to another depot and dropped off and left there. Another driver picks it up, carries it to another spot. Another driver to another spot. So the trailer gets in really rough condition. How are its brakes? You know, these trailers that tractor trailers carry are big and heavy, and they have independent braking systems. If those aren't working, that's something we need to look at. Who owned the trailer? Who was supposed to maintain it? That may be another defendant. Or another pocket of insurance that we should look at on behalf of our client. So, what do we do with all this information? I can tell you what some of our first steps would be. And the very first one is usually to look for a police report. Now, often you can get a police report online in a matter of minutes from buycrash.com. But that article from the Tifton Gazette said that the Georgia State Patrol had investigated this. Now, we know that Georgia State Patrol is one of the few law enforcement agencies in Georgia that doesn't use buycrash.com. So instead of using that, we're probably going to have to send an open records request to GSP, or the Georgia State Patrol. And they're probably going to tell us they're still investigating the collision. They can't give us the whole thing, but we should be able to get a preliminary report. And that will have some good information. It'll have the name of the truck company and hopefully their DOT number. With that, we could then go to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's webpage and pull up a lot of information about them. We can find out things like how many trucks they have. Do they have a history of violations? What is their insurance situation? So that's an early step. We would also want to send what's called a spoliation letter. I'll write FMCSA up here for that report from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We would also want to send a spoliation letter. This spoliation is a fancier way to talk about the preservation of evidence, because there's a lot of evidence here that is in the control of the truck company. And we want to send them a letter in black and white, definitely in writing, return receipt requested, also probably by fax or email, and say, please preserve this evidence. And if you don't, we're going to hold it against you later. Because we need some stuff preserved. We need the truck preserved. Don't go fix the truck. We want to look at it so we can assess the damage and the damage pattern before the thing gets fixed. We want to look at the electronic control module, or ECM information. That is the sort of black box that records, or should record, when the driver hit the brakes, if at all, how fast the driver was going, and maybe even historical information. We want the driver's logs, log books, and any sort of electronic tracking they had on the truck, so that we can go back and look for hours of service violations like we talked about earlier. So that'll be what spoliation covers. We will also want to look for body camera footage from the officers who arrived there on the scene. Because the body camera footage will tell us a lot. It should tell us what witnesses had to say. You know, there were for a long time, you had to look at the police report, and if the police officer didn't write everything down very well, you were kind of out of luck for figuring out what happened on the scene. Now, A lot of times we find that the body-worn camera on the officer will tell us exactly what the at-fault driver and any witnesses had to say. And that brings us to the next point. This is something that, in my view, our law firm does really well, and that is witness work. A lot of people don't do it because it's hard. You got to chase people down. You got to get out of your office and knock on people's doors sometimes. But figuring out what the witnesses to this collision saw and getting to them early, explaining who we are, explaining that we're honest and we're just looking into the case, we want to know what happened, and making a connection with them early is really important. So the witness work is something that we would prioritize. And then there come inspections. We'll want to inspect the truck. I mentioned that in the spoliation letter. We'll look at the truck so that our accident reconstruction expert can analyze the crash patterns and tell what happened. We'll want to have a bunch of pictures and probably 3D electronic scans of it, in addition to know a lot about the maintenance of the truck for something like an industry standards expert, which we sometimes retain in cases where it looks like the truck company wasn't doing its job. All that comes with the inspection of the truck. Number 7, we'll want to get out there to the scene of the collision. I know who we've used. We have a fella that we work with a lot in North Florida, and this is South Georgia, so he's very close. He's a first-class reconstruction guy. We would want to get him and his team out to the scene so they could do sort of all the things that you would think of. They would want to look for skid marks, debris on the road, gouge marks in the pavement, anything that's off the road that can show us what happened. So that would be some of our initial workup for a truck collision. There's one other sort of interesting angle here that we would want to think about, and it's this. And I don't know whether this would work in this case or not, because we don't have enough evidence yet, but we want to think about a product liability case. And the reason for that relates to the specific way that this collision happened. So according to the Tifton Gazette, that newspaper article, the tractor trailer ran through the stop sign, and then the car actually hit the trailer. Couldn't stop in time and went up and struck the trailer. Now what probably happened is that the front of the car went underneath the trailer. It's an underride collision. And that's probably why there's a fatality, because when that happens, when a car slides up under a truck, you can have some really nasty injuries. You can imagine what happens when the base of that high-riding trailer strikes the front of the car, the A-pillar windshield area of the car. I mean, you can have decapitation. This is how one way people get killed. Well, some trailers, and the better built trailers, should have guards running down the side of them so that that doesn't happen, so people can't get stuck riding up underneath. And we would want to look at whether this trailer had a guard. If it did, what condition were the welds in? Sometimes the weld that holds the guard to the underside of the trailer isn't well maintained. If it's rusted out and everyone's just ignored it because the trailer's getting passed around, then that could have failed, and that may be the cause of this collision. So these are some of the things we look at. This is what we think about and what we do to get started. Thanks for watching.